that to eat it. If you want some of the cookies, it's
For
already
28,
like a
2023, police cars swarmed a fancy estate and closed in on a woman who had never been touched before. Nicole Johnson was more than just the wife of a gangster. She was the brains behind one of South Africa's most complex crime networks. Nicole made a kingdom of fear and power, with everything from building plans to pill networks. She was going to fall hard, though, no matter how high she went. At dawn, Constantia's green streets looked calm, but chaos was waiting behind high walls. On September 28, 2023, bright lights and sirens broke the silence. A lot of police cars surrounded a house that had been a secret hideout for a long time. News stations beeped, headlines screamed, and neighbors whispered that they couldn't believe it. Nicole Johnson's world was falling apart behind those gates, spilling out the kingdom she had worked so hard to build. In the Western Cape, Nicole's story began a long time before the raid. There, rich and poor people lived together. People she grew up with didn't have many chances, and breaking the rules was often the only way to stay alive. From a very young age, she was driven and always looking for ways to get ahead. She had small jobs and side businesses that kept her going, but she wanted more than just to stay alive. She didn't want to settle for normal. She wanted to rise. Ralph Stanfield, the notorious 28's gang boss, was a guy whose name was important in Cape Town's criminal world. He changed her life. Ralph was not only feared, but also looked up to because he was connected to a shady group. Nicole saw chance where others saw danger. She started to work with him, at first in small ways, like handling money and planning trips. She proved her worth with each job, and Ralph saw that she wasn't just able, she was necessary. It was a shield of authority that they built together. Nicole worked for companies that seemed clean on the outside but had darker sides. Glomex House Brokers became the crown gem and won huge bids and projects all over the city. Behind the paperwork, peers stayed away because of claims of fake credentials and threats of violence. Nicole bought a house in Sea Point under her name, which raised red flags even while Ralph was in jail. The police began to think that these weren't just investments, but rather layers of hiding. Nicole was the best at living two lives at the same time. People thought she was a polished businesswoman because she owned beauty shops and managed properties. For people who knew, she was the quiet force behind a strong web of crime. She managed the money, made deals, and made sure their business grew beyond the streets. Her name came up in darker circles when she was linked to the steroid trade and to a very important person in the business who went missing, Brian Weinstein. At Weinstein's hearing, a bodyguard said things that shocked many people. He said Nicole wasn't just watching, but was actively engaged in smuggling performance-enhancing pills across borders. Based on what she said, she seemed well-organized, connected, and brave enough to handle packages without fear. Later, recordings came out that supposedly showed her voice talking about prices and routes. This wasn't a picture of a silent partner. It was proof of someone carefully running a network. Investigators were keeping a close eye on Nicole as she climbed higher. Financial intelligence units kept an eye on her company's strange payments and bids. Whistleblowers talked about being scared, being threatened, and signing contracts that never did what they said they would do. Even the expensive homes she bought in public became signs because they left a trail that was harder to follow. The walls she had built to keep things secret started to fall apart, and her kingdom began to show signs of weakness. Some people finally spoke out after years of fear, keeping most people quiet. Employees, rivals, and even former friends started working with detectives and giving them information about how the couple did things. People began to whisper Nicole's name in back rooms.
I think so.
In official reports. It was proven that Glomex House Brokers was involved in serious corruption when the city put them on a blacklist. What looked like power before now looked like a chain that was pulling her down. By 2023, the stress could be felt in both the business and crime communities of Cape Town. Her shops were losing their shine, her businesses were getting more attention, and the police were following her around like hawks. Nicole wasn't able to keep the right mix between public respect and secret control. Each news story about her made her seem less safe and more open. It wasn't a question of if she would fall, but when. As Nicole Johnson's fame grew, so did the desire of people who wanted to bring her down. As the case was being built brick by brick, the anti-gang unit and the National Prosecuting Authority got tighter. Investigators looked at her financial records and found strange ways for money to be moving through property deals and bids. Phone records and wiretaps showed coded conversations that hinted at secret activities. The police now had a map of the kingdom she thought was invisible for the first time. The plan moved slowly but carefully. The police knew that one wrong move could throw her off, and make her hide even more. Teams of people watching her moved in and out of her salons, construction offices, and private houses. With each new piece of proof, the file that showed how her businesses were connected to shady networks grew. It was no longer a rumor. There was proof ready to be shown. When the media learned about her real estate deals, the first cracks in her perfect image showed up. There were reports that while her husband was in jail, she rented a fancy flat in Sea Point. The people saw it as money that didn't matter, but investigators saw something else. The deal revealed possible ways to hide money by showing how money was moved into assets that looked like they were real. The things Nicole said were signs of success now looked like a smokescreen. Glomix house brokers were put on a blacklist, which gave them even more damaging publicity. The National Treasury said the company could not get any more government contracts because of problems with how the bids were won. The result was a big blow because it showed the state didn't trust her most important business anymore. Not only did it cost money, but it also had a big meaning. It was becoming less and less acceptable for Nicole to run her business company. The difference between Nicole's good looks and the accusations against her became too much to ignore. She ran beauty shops and hung out with Cape Town's rich and famous, so she seemed like a very wealthy woman. But behind the scenes, competitors said they were scared, threatened, and deals that seemed fixed from the start. Tenders made for businesses that were having trouble were stolen and used to grow her empire. There were rumors that she wasn't working alone, and officials may have ignored them. Each thing that happened brought her more attention. The Sea Point flat made people wonder how assets were kept safe under legal cover. Glomix's being put on a blacklist showed that her network of power was limited when she was out in the open. Soon after, more and more charges were brought against them, including racketeering, hiding money, and tender theft. The accusations of having firearms added to the picture of a life built on more than just business goals. One charge after another, Nicole was getting squished, but it wasn't paperwork or bids that really hurt her business. From the inside, it was betrayal. People who used to be loyal or afraid of her started to turn against her. There were other people who were willing to talk about the pills case besides the ex-bodyguard. Over time, other people started to leak information that linked her private life to every front page story. There is more truth in these stories than in any financial report. People who worked there talked about how contracts were won, how rivals were scared away, and how money was hidden. People who used to help her climb were now in the way of her fall. With each new detail, the secret that had been keeping her safe for years was taken away. Nicole could no longer be sure of quiet. Her world was leaking out from the inside. Nicole's name was talked about everywhere by the time the police presented their results. She was no longer the background of a man's kingdom. She was the center of a national scandal. What used to protect her now made her a target. She had been manipulating the system for years, but now it was starting to catch up with her. The walls of luxury around her life were starting to fall down. With no more places to hide, the Shadow Queen was quickly being caught in the net. It took months of planning for the raid on Nicole Johnson's home in Constantia. Before dawn, police units quietly moved into place and surrounded the house. What was inside the walls could connect one of Cape Town's most infamous people to a crime empire. The stakes were very high. Officers broke down the gates and searched every room and building on the huge site. In the end, they took out boxes that were full of weapons, phones, papers, and financial records. The arrest happened right after the raid, which caught Johnson and her friends by surprise. Nicole Johnson was arrested along with Ralph Stanfield, her boyfriend, and a number of people connected to their businesses. The charges were very serious: racketeering, theft, money laundering, and having weapons illegally. Each charge went after the core of the empire she had built by hiding behind real estate and building deals. The law was no longer following her around. It had come right up to her house. This time the fight was over bail, but Johnson's attempts were resisted at every step. Prosecutors said she was too strong, had too many connections, and was too likely to lie to witnesses or run away. The judges looked at her credibility and took into account how much proof was found during the Constantia raid. Wiretaps, bank records, and testimony from people who used to be loyal all worked against her. With each failed bail hearing, the courts held her even tighter. The case turned into more than just her defense. It was a test for the courts. When the High Court took over, it showed how serious the charges were and how they would affect the national interest. Pre-trial hearing dates were set, which brought Johnson's name even more into the news. Every decision in court turned the room into a stage that showed how strong the prosecution was. The life of luxury that no one could touch used to be limited by court dates and strict legal rules. There was a lot of attention in the media, and the story went beyond Cape Town. Newspapers showed pictures of the raid and wrote about how the businesswoman who was charged with being much more than she said she was. On social media, people who didn't like her called her a symbol of corruption, while people who did like her said she was being attacked. The flashy exterior of high-class life clashed with the harsh reality of chains and court dates. People started to look closely at her, which hurt her image, which she had worked hard to keep up. A lot of people had very different reactions as more information came out. Some people were shocked that someone with so much money and power could hide behind criminal charges. Others said the signs were always there. Contracts won in strange ways, enemies being shut up, and sudden shows of power. People who had lost business to her companies felt better when they heard the news. But for the people close to her, fear grew as the walls seemed to close in. It didn't matter how much money they had, they were still going to be found out. When investigators found out about the Sea Point flat buy, that was the most telling moment. The fact that it was bought while Johnson was already in jail raises questions about how the law was changed to help her. The flat was more than just a house. It became a sign of pride and the idea that rules didn't apply. Along with Glomix Housebrokers being put on a blacklist, it showed how quickly the company was falling apart. These facts showed that she wasn't a smart businessman, but rather someone who did well in the shadows of corruption. Under pressure from the government, sources of income that used to run non-stop started to dry up. Contracts were canceled, bids were blocked, and assets were taken away because they might have been used to commit crimes. Banks were hesitant, business partners pulled away, and friends stopped talking. Every move the government made tightened the noose around her kingdom. Money and power had seemed to be locked up in what now looked like a castle built on sand. There was no longer a fear of reckoning in the future. It was happening right now. People used to be afraid or impressed when they heard Nicole Johnson's name, but now it was linked to scandal and fall. There wasn't much room for escape with all the captured assets, insider testimony, and corruption that was made public. Even her most devoted fans had a hard time defending what had been said. The false sense of control had been replaced by the cold truth of a country falling apart. In the case of Nicole Johnson, speculation turned into hard proof that the High Court had to look at. During the months-long pre-trial conferences, she and her group were charged with a huge number of crimes. Racketeering, fraud, car theft, and money laundering were just the beginning of the case, which involved many businesses and cities. The couple allegedly stole a BMW worth $326,202 rands from a Palm Springs security complex in Milnerton on November 24, 2022. The 28's gang boss and his wife were also accused of fraud for allegedly misleading a police officer into believing that the BMW belonged to them. Meanwhile, it was alleged that Nicole arranged with a man named Brandt to take the life of the owner of the vehicle. Brandt was also arrested. Ralph Stanfield Johnson and a few family members went to court, not as well-known business people, but as people who were suspected of committing crimes. It was in the courts that their empire would either be protected or taken apart. As the hearing went on, Johnson's business lost its appearance of being legitimate. Glomix Housebrokers was once a big name in Cape Town's building business, but the government stopped giving them work. Every night, contracts worth millions of dollars disappeared, leaving workers and freelancers unsure of what would happen to them. The brand that had promised growth in homes was now linked to dishonesty and fraud. Every project that had anything to do with Johnson was tainted by her case, which hurt its reputation. As agents froze assets and looked closely at her accounts, the financial mess got worse. The Financial Intelligence Center watched bank transfers and seized properties, which revealed the flow of hidden money. Developers who used to work directly with her had their deals looked into, which showed the holes she had been using for years. Every new piece of information broke down the idea of a legal business base. Johnson's financial empire was built on layers of secret, but it was all taken apart in plain sight. When her funds went down, her closest family members were also affected. Johnson's brother and mother-in-law were charged with crimes that had to do with the business. Their actions were meant to protect the family property, but instead, they were used by the prosecution. The trial showed how strong family ties were in keeping the empire going, and how those same links made the law more strict. Nicole tried to apply for bail, using her daughter's ailment as a justifiable reason to stay out of jail. However, the court denied her bail. Testimonies from people who were there made things worse, and put more attention on family members. Statements explained what each person did, such as managing money or scaring off competitors. Each betrayal hurt their defense and let the authorities know where to put more pressure. The wall of silence that had kept Johnson's group safe for years broke because of their need to stay alive. The state got the keys to break up her network one by one from witnesses. When Johnson fell, it affected a lot more than just her family and business. People who depended on social housing projects connected to her business were left without a plan B. Many of the things that were supposed to happen didn't happen, and people in the area had to pay for the corruption at the top. The story showed not only how greedy one network was, but also how weak whole systems are that are supposed to help regular people, the fault people in places other than the courtroom. The case had bigger effects that the authorities couldn't ignore. When rigged bids and hidden money flows were found, promises of changes to procurement and control had to be made. Politicians and watchdogs talked about fixing holes that developers could use to avoid being inspected. The Financial Intelligence Center pushed for tighter rules on where money could come from and how properties could be sold. Johnson's case was both a warning and a model for how to fight crime in the future. We don't mean that Nicole Johnson has been found guilty for good yet when we say that she met her end. The High Court is still hearing her case, and decisions and sentences have not been given yet. What ended was her shield of money, power, and a perfect image. The glamorous picture of a well-known businesswoman fell apart when facts and exposure came out. Her fall was more about the loss of power than the end of her life story. The lesson in her story is sharp and makes you think. Johnson showed for years how ambition and poor monitoring can make someone look like they can't be beat. She got around land laws, money systems, and financial checks by finding holes in them and building a wall around her kingdom. Still, every possible way out she used put more risk on her, ready for the day when it would all go wrong. Her rise and fall show that desire that isn't tempered will lead to its own destruction in the end. The wall that held up her kingdom the least was oversight. There were no thorough checks on real estate deals. Government bids were hacked, and money moved for years without being seen. These holes in the law gave Johnson room to hide, which helped her do very well. But when agents narrowed their attention, those cracks turned into easy ways for people to be found out. The story of her case shows that strict tracking isn't just about numbers. It's also about keeping people safe from hidden power. Many people who saw what happened helped bring down her company. The evidence of her former bodyguard in the steroid trade trial showed what she had been doing behind closed doors. Press outlets like Amabungane and News 24 kept up the pressure and dug deeper when official stories were too light. The public could see the story through their work long before it was shown in court. She might have been able to keep up her act for a lot longer without them. Whistleblowers also showed guts in places where fear often keeps people from speaking out. Specifics were given by people in her group or close enough to see through the mask. The state's case was made stronger by their leaks, which broke down the wall of secret Johnson had built. Even though each statement came with a personal risk, they all changed the balance of power in the probe. It showed that keeping quiet can feed wrongdoing, but speaking out can starve it. In the future, the story is still not over. Johnson still has to go through hearings, appeals, and maybe even years of court cases. The sentences she could get if she is found guilty could be worse than just losing her name. If co-accused people decide to testify against the other people, even more lies may come to light. The road ahead is unclear, but it will definitely shape South Africa's fight against corruption. Also, the state is not done recovering assets. We are still keeping a close eye on bank accounts, expensive homes, and deals that aren't public. With each study, more of the empire's secrets could be found. Johnson might get some legal help, but the financial damage is likely to last. Her money, which used to protect her, is now being used against her. Nicole Johnson's story is not just about crime. It is about how even the strongest empires can collapse when truth finally breaks through. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.